Masechet Gittin Daf Peh. We're in the middle of a Mishnah that mentioned that if someone writes a get and puts the date with the wrong format, or gets the names wrong, or other problems, then the get is like somewhat valid, but not really valid, and therefore there are a list of about 15 penalties. She has to leave. Both husbands get a get from both husbands. She doesn't get a ketuvah from either husband, and so on. And now we're going to see a couple of more cases where she gets the same penalties because of some complication, and the next two have to do with yibum. So we have a law about yibum. Kol ha'arayot shamru sarotehen mutarot v'halchu hasarot ha'elu v'nis'u v'nimsu'u elu ailonit teseh mizeh u'mizeh v'chol ha'derachim ha'elu ba. There's a law about yibum that if a husband dies without children, let's say he's married to two wives, if one of them does yibum, then the other one, the rival wife, can go and marry anyone she wants. All right, only one of the wives does yibum or chalitza. Furthermore, in this case, a husband is married to his niece and to a non-related woman. He dies without children. The surviving brother is the father of one of the wives. So obviously, a father cannot do yibum. He doesn't need to do chalitza either. There is just no obligation at all whatsoever. Because there is no possibility and no obligation for one of the wives to do yibum or chalitza, so too the rival wife is off the hook. She can go and marry anyone she wants. So in this first case, no yibum or chalitza actually happens. Here is that's all the easy part. Here is the complication. It turns out that niece, wife, was an ailonit. Ailonit means is a woman who never developed properly, could not have children. And therefore that marriage was not officially a valid marriage all the way going back to the beginning. And therefore she did not exempt her rival wife from doing yibum or chalitza. So if that rival wife went and married someone else in between, and Gemara will talk about if let's say she didn't get married, she just had relations with someone without marriage. Does this apply also? But certainly if she married someone, she has all these penalties because she, on the one hand, was married to the first husband who died, but he died, so now they're not married anymore, but she was not permitted to go and marry a second husband until she did yibum or chalitza. And the rival co-wife, who we thought was related to the yavam, we thought it could be any close relation. In our example, it was a daughter. We thought that she exempted by being the daughter, but it turns out that since she was never actually married because she was an ailonit, so the rival wife was not exempted. So she had to do yibum chalitza, and she didn't do either. Instead, she went and married some other guy. So she has to leave that second guy and receive a get, and so on. Okay, similar case. Hakoneset yevimto v'alcha sarata v'niset la'acher v'nimset zo she'ayta ailonit teseh mizeh u'mizeh v'chol haderachim ha'elu ba. A man is married to two women, and he dies without children. So now these are not related to anybody. So one of those women, she's now the yevama, we'll call her. She does yibum. Okay, very good. And the other rival wife, now that one of the rival wives did yibum, so she is allowed to go and she marries someone else. However, after some time, it turns out that the yevama was an ailonit, and therefore that yibum was not valid, the marriage was not valid, and this rival wife who went and married someone else in between was not permitted to. So again, she has to leave both, one husband is dead, but she has to leave the other husband, and she gets all of the other penalties in the Mishnah. Gemara will talk about why we need this case and the previous case, because they are similar. They're both talking about yibum, where someone turns out to be an ailonit. Katab sofer get la'ish v'shovad la'isha v'ta'a v'natan get la'isha v'shovad la'ish v'natnu ze lazeh. Now you have a problem. The scribe, he's writing a get, and the get is he's supposed to give it to the husband, and then the husband will give it to the wife. On the other hand, he's writing a receipt that the wife received payment of the ketubah. That the wife is supposed to give to the husband, and the husband will keep it. So that's what he's supposed to do. So now the scribe is writing the get that he's supposed to give to the husband, and the shavad he's supposed to give to the wife, and that way they'll switch. But then he made a mistake, the scribe, and he gave the get to the wife. This is not a valid get, right? The scribe can't give the get to the wife. The husband has to give it to her. And then the husband, and they gave them to each other. So the wife thought that she received the get. They didn't open it up and read it. I guess the witnesses have to read it. Let's say they read it beforehand, and then to the hands of the scribe, and he accidentally switched them. They look alike. And so the wife received just a receipt, and so that's nothing. And then the wife gave the husband the get, which does not effectuate a get. And so after some time, they realized their mistake. One day they opened it up. And one day the husband produces the get, and the wife produces the receipt. And now we see, they were never married. They were never divorced this entire time. And let's say in the meantime, she went ahead and married a second husband. She has to leave both because technically she's married to the first guy, but under false pretenses, under a mistake, she married someone else, and so now she has had relations with the second person while she technically was married to the first person, and therefore she has to be, she gets all these penalties. Somebody should have been a little bit more careful and checked if that was in fact the get. Rabbi Elazar Omer, Im la'atad yasa, en ze get. Im la'achar zman yasa, hare ze get. Lo kol amenu min harishon la'abed zechuto shel sheni. Rabbi Elazar disagrees and says, no, we're not going to have a problem of a safek, teseh mizeh mizeh, penalty. No, it's a simple solution. If right away they realize their mistake, the Gemara will give two opinions about when is right away. But let's say they're sitting there, and she receives this document. She opens it up. She says, "This is a receipt. This is not a get." So then there is no get here, right? It's simply a mistake, and nothing happened. If they want to just leave and continue being married, they can, right? There is no get at all. However, if it's after some time, they realize the mistake, and they come and present it and to the court. So then we say, sorry, this is a valid get. Even though she comes in saying, I received a receipt, I never received my get, the court says, you are fully divorced. Why? Because we're not going to believe them, the first husband, to ruin the rights of the second husband. In other words, we suspect that maybe they're colluding. The first husband and the wife, maybe they want to get back together, or they don't like the second husband, and so they go and switch. Really, she got the correct document, she got the get, but they go switch it, and they go to court and says, oh, look, there's a mistake here, and we were never divorced. Oh, the second guy is out. So we can't believe them, and because it will take away the right of the second husband to be married to her. And so therefore, if it's after time, we say, listen, you should have checked, and we assume that the get was valid. That's what we assumed all along, and they are just tricking us. All right, that's a very interesting opinion of Rabbi Elazar. Now, Gemara, Mai malchut she'ena hogenet. Mishnah said that if they write in the get the date according to the year of an improper empire, then it's we have all of these problems. The get is she has to leave both husbands. So what is that kingdom that is not proper? What is that? Which kingdom is that? Malchut HaRomiyim. It's the Roman Empire. It's called an illegitimate empire because they do not have their own script or their own language. In fact, the Romans, they came in and they took over an area where they spoke and wrote Latin, and they said, oh, this is a nice script and language, and they were fighting wars, but they didn't have much culture themselves. They took over the Greek Empire, and they said, oh, look, you have nice philosophers and things. All right, we'll take that over as well. They took over Judaism, and they also stole our Bible, other people's cultures, including their very own language. This is a way of kind of making fun of Rome. of the Roman Empire. The rabbis writing this Mishnah were under the Roman Empire, but they recognized, look, they may be in charge, they may have a lot of power, but they actually only steal things from other people and have nothing to produce themselves, making them illegitimate. All right, even though they're illegitimate still, we have to write our get according to the year of the Roman emperor. Amar Ula, mipnei ma takinu malchut begittin mishum shelo malchut. What's the reason? Ula explains why we write the year of the kingdom in the get, because to have peace with the kingdom. In other words, the emperor, whatever country the Jewish community is living in, they're going to come and look. It says, well, what kind of date are you putting in there? And let's say they write a date to some other ruler for a different country. This is, well, that's where your loyalty is, right? Or if they write to some biblical date, and they say, well, it seems like you are not loyal to us. So therefore, we put it in. We put the local country, emperor, king, to show that, no, we are loyal citizens, even though we have our own system of marriage and divorce, and we have our own legal system, actually, but still we recognize the authority of the king, of the emperor, and that way, that leads to peaceful relations, which is also very important. Mishum shalom malchut mamzer. But then we ask, wait a second, I understand, having peace with the kingdom is a good value, but because of that, if you make a mistake and don't write it in that way, so now you're going to tell me the get is invalid and the second marriage is problematic and she has to leave, and the child that she has from the second marriage is called a mamzer, and any child she has, if she goes back to the first husband, that will also be a mamzer. You're going to cause all these serious consequences because peace of the government, peace with the government, and we answer in Rabbi Meir l'ta'amed. Amar Hamununa mishmei de'ola, Omer ya Rabbi Meir kol mishanem mimatbea shetabu chachamim begitin havalad mamzer. We say yes, indeed, and this Mishnah, Stam Mishnah, we say is Rabbi Meir. So we assume this is Rabbi Meir, and he follows his own opinion because Rav Hamnuna said in the name of Ula, Rabbi Meir used to say, anyone who changes the coinage that the rabbis legislated for a get, the get is invalid, and if she goes and has a child after that with another man, then that child is a mamzer. So the point is not so much that the peace with the government is worth making kids a mamzer. That's not directly that. It's that the rabbis got together and they said, here's proper language that you should use. Once they give you a proper formula, if you deviate from that, now it's an invalid, improperly formatted get. It's invalid, and therefore it will cause mamzerut. So it's not directly because we care about the Romans that much, but rather because we care about the standardization and coinage that the rabbis gave us. L'shum malchut Yavan usricha diyashmu inan malchut she'ena hogenet mishum demelicha ava malchut Madai u'malchut Yavan ma'ida hava. If someone writes in the name of the Greek Empire, that's already long gone, also the get is invalid. Now, why do we need to? Why is it necessary to say both of these halachot of the Roman? The Roman government one was invalid if you're in Persia, right? If you're in Rome and you write the Roman government, that's fine. But let's say you're in a different country, in Persia, and you write the Roman government, that's no good. So now we ask, why do we need both of these cases? Okay, as follows. If you only had the case of the rival government, right? If you're in Persia and you write the Roman government, then you'd say that certainly is no good, because if the Romans hear about that, the Persians hear about that, and they say, you wrote about the Roman government. The Romans and the Persians were, oh, look, you wrote the Roman government here, and you're living in Persia, so that they would get very upset, and this would be a big problem for peace, because they're currently, the Roman government is currently in power. But Madai and Yavan, they're all long gone. They're no longer around, the Hellenistic Empire. And therefore, let's say you're living in Persia and you write from King Seleucus. So they would say, oh, you're writing from some ancient king. They're not a rival to us now, so maybe they wouldn't mind. So therefore, kamash malan, that they would mind. And they say, why are you still writing to the Hellenists and not writing for our government? You're under Persian rule now. Case of writing it to a kingdom that is past, like Media or the Hellenistic Empire. That's because they were, in fact, empires that were in power. But the building of the Bet HaMikdash, that's not doesn't represent a country. That's a event that happened in the past. And so you might think that the government wouldn't care about that. Right? You'll see you're under the Romans, and they see you writing something from the building of the temple. Well, that was not a kingdom, so okay, you're writing from some historical event, and that was in the past. You would think maybe they wouldn't mind. No, they do mind, because you're expected to, when you write a date, you're expected, everybody in the whole world, they write dates according to the kingdom that they're in. And so they would get insulted, and it would be bad for peace. And if only had the case of the building of the Bet HaMikdash, and not the case of destruction, then I might have thought that the Romans or whoever would be upset about that, because the Jews are mentioning their praise, right? They're trying to remember when they had a Bet HaMikdash, and you see they're upset that we destroyed it, and so they would be particular about that. But let's say it says this many years from the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash, in which the Jews are mentioning their own anguish, maybe the Roman government would be okay with that. So therefore it teaches us that this also, the Romans would be particular. And it's like, why are you writing for the destruction of your Bet HaMikdash? Even though, yeah, we destroyed it, and this is your anguish. But even doing that shows that you care about that more than you care about us. And so the Romans really want their own government to be there. And same would be true for whatever empire or kingdom that they are in. All right, so that's why we need all those examples in the Mishnah. It says if he was in the east and he wrote the place in the west. So the place of whom? Are you talking about the place of the husband, where he lives? But that would be changing. It says later on in the Mishnah, there's a clause that says if you change their name or the name of his city, then it's an invalid get. So we already have a case where you put the wrong city name for the husband. So it can't be talking about his wrong city name. Ela lav sofer kedamar lehu l'safre v'chen amar lehu Rav Huna l'safre ki yatbitu b'shili ketubu b'shili v'af al gav demim seran lechu mili behini v'chi yatvitu behini ketubu behini af al gav demim seran lechu mili b'shili. Rather, we're talking about the place of the scribe. In addition to putting the place name that the husband is from here and the wife is from here, the scribe also has to write where he is writing the document and where it's going to be signed. That has to be in the get. As Rav would tell his scribe, and Rav Huna would tell his scribes, the scribes that worked in their courts, it says, listen, if you're in Shili, this is a city over here, and you're writing the scribe, if you're writing the get in Shili, you have to write in Shili, even though it's going to be given, you're going to give it in Hini. So even though it's going to take effect in Hini, but you have to write it's being written in Shili, and the same thing the other way around. So you have to write where it's being written and signed, even if that's a different place. So Shmuel teaches us that the Mishnah, our Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who is more machmir, and he requires that you have to write the name of the kingdom, the emperor, in order for the get to be valid, to have peaceful relations. However, Hachamim are more lenient, and they say, even if you didn't write the king, the emperor, and you only wrote some guard, senator, right, santar, sheba'ir, even if you only wrote some local city council member, that is still fine, the get is fine. As long as you wrote to some official, it doesn't have to be the emperor. Okay, now, Hahu Gita story, Tavaketi be L'Shem Istandera de Bischar, Shelachar Rav Nachman bar Rav Chista Lekamed Rabba, Ki Hai Gavna Mai, the governor of the city of Baskar, The date was written according to that government, and Rav Nachman sent it to Rabbah to say, is this a valid get? Shalach lebeha afilu Rabbi Meir modeh. My ta'ama me'otam malchutu. And he said, listen, if it's that, if even Rabbi Meir would agree in this case that it's valid because it's from that kingdom. It's a member of the kingdom. So the point is that even according to Rabbi Meir, it doesn't have to be the king or the emperor himself. Even if it's someone from the government in a lower position, that is totally fine. The problem is only if you're going to pick some guard who's not officially part of the government, he's just like an important person, but doesn't represent the government, then that is no good because the government will be insulted. And the difference is because if it's a guard, then this is demeaning for to write such a low official who's actually not even an official, right? It's demeaning to the government. But if it's someone who is of a higher authority and represents the government, then that's okay, right? You don't have to put the president. You could put the vice president. You could put a congressman. Those people represent the government. But some lowly traffic cop, that the person does not represent the government and therefore is no good. Amar Rabbi Abba Amar Rav Huna Amar Rav Zot divrei Rabbi Meir v'chachamim omrim havalad kasher. This statement in the name of Rav is similar to the one we just saw in the name of Shemuel, that this chumrah, that if you write the date in the wrong format, then it's an invalid get, and you have all of these penalties. That is only the opinion of Rabbi Meir. This Stam Mishnah here is Rabbi Meir. However, Chachamim are more lenient, and they say that if she would get married, and if she does get married and has a child, that child will be fine, not a mamzer. So language is a little weaker than saying it's a good get. Not saying it's a good get, but the child is okay. Okay, so that's the first thing that Rav is saying, basically in agreement with Shemuel. But now we agree, and now he adds, Umodim chachamim l'Rabbi Meir shimshina shemo ushma shem iro v'shem ira shavalad mamzer. However, chachamim agree with Rabbi Meir that if you put the wrong name, the name is misspelled, you put the wrong place name for the husband or for the wife, then that is completely invalid, and if she has a child afterwards, that child will be a mamzer. In other words, the first half of the Mishnah is in fact only the opinion of Rabbi Meir, but from this point on, where it says the changing of the names, and you get all the penalties, that Chachamim would agree with. Amar Rav Asher, afana nami tanena shina shemo ushma shem iro v'shem ira teseh mizeh u'mizeh v'chol haderechim ha'elu ba. Rav Asher says, I can prove from the format of our Mishnah that, in fact, the second part is the opinion of Chachamim and not only to be Meir. Because we read, after it says the first cases of having the wrong format of the date, and then it lists all of the 15 different penalties. After that, a new paragraph says if they wrote the wrong name or the wrong city, then also she has to leave both and all the rest of the penalties. Now, man katani la, who is the author of this section? If it's also to be Meir, then it should have been together. Put all the cases up front that are going to be problematic regarding Gittin and the formatting and the writing of Gittin, and then list all of the 15 penalties. Why'd you put the penalties and then add another case? Rather, it's evident that the first part of the Mishnah is only the opinion of Rabbi Meir. That's the invalid formatting of the date. And other cases that are mentioned there, and then putting the sofer, putting the wrong place of where it was written and signed, and then the new paragraph. Well, if it was to be Meir, you put it together with the rest of them. The fact that you have a new paragraph shows that this is a different author. This is the opinion of Rabbanan. All right. Kol ha'arayot she'ameru nisuin in zinu ala. The Mishnah mentioned that if anytime you have a man who's married to his relative, like his niece, and also to someone not related, and he dies without children, so there is no yibum or chalitza at all if the yavam is related to the wives. Now, okay, that's the basic halacha. However, if it turns out that that woman who is related is an Ailonit, and therefore the original marriage was never a marriage and there was no yibum or chalitza need for her. The other rival wife needed to do yibum. If she married a second guy, she gets the penalties. So now we teach. Nisu'in, that's only true if she married a second, had promiscuous relations outside of marriage with that second guy, and then let's say had children. So then not so. Those children would not be mamzerim. You see, this is not actual adultery because the husband is dead, so there is no marriage anymore. However, there's a lav that she may not go and marry and be. But the question is, how seriously should we apply the consequences of her of violating this? She, in this case, she did so unintentionally. She thought that her rival wife, is exempted her. Turns out she didn't exempt her. Okay, so if she goes and marries, then yes, she gets penalties. But if she just had relations outside of marriage, she does not get the penalties. Now, this statement seems to be go against what Rav Hamnuna said. Rav Hamnuna said that if a woman is awaiting yibum and she didn't do yibum yet, and then she goes and she has relations outside of marriage with another man, she is prohibited from doing yibum after that. In other words, does get the penalties. And here, this statement just said that there is no penalties if she had relations outside of marriage. It's not quite official. So isn't that a problem? So rather, we are going to change. We are just making an inference from the Mishnah. And we say, you know what, that's not a necessary inference. Although the Mishnah talks about marriage, but the same would be true if this woman, this rival wife, went and had relations outside of marriage. Also, she would get all the penalties, as Rav Hamnuna says. And why does the Mishnah not say that? How come it says marriage? It wants to talk about a nice case, right? That she did some things in a proper way. Turned out, in the end, it was a problem. But we don't want to talk about cases where people go and do things outside of marriage. Okay, ve'ika de'amres. Some say this same conversation, but everything flipped around. Nisu v'uadin lezinu. We start off with our inference that the Mishnah says, although the Mishnah gives a case of where she went and married, the same would be if she didn't actually do kiddushin, she was just with another guy. Also, she would get all of these penalties, and she would have to divorce that second guy, and kids would be problems, and so on. Lema mesaya le Rav Hamnuna damad Rav Hamnuna shemet yavam shizinta asura livama. This seems to support Rav Hamnuna, who says, in general, any shomeret yavam that goes and has relations with someone else is prohibited to her yavama. Even if she doesn't get married to another guy, she is still prohibited to go back to her yavam. Lo, is that a good proof? Lo nisu davka mishum demichalefa beisha shehalach ba'ala lemidinat hayam. Says no, the Mishnah marriage only. And why would you limit the penalties to marriage only? Because in the case where a rival wife would go and get married to someone else, that's similar to a case of a woman whose husband goes away to a country overseas. And she, in other words, both cases, she is bound to someone, but she's not sure, and she gets a report, in that case, that the husband has died, and she gets remarried. That's the pedic. And in that case, if the husband comes back, she got a report that he died, but turns out he was alive, and he comes back, and in the meantime, she married someone else, she gets all of these penalties. So that is a classic case here where, yes, she must get all these penalties. She was married to the first husband who went away, and then she did a marriage with the second one, and therefore she's going to have all those penalties. She's really stuck in a bind. That case is very similar and can be mixed up with this case of the rival wife who was supposed to had do yibum, but she thought that a different rival wife did it, and so she went and got married. If she gets married, that's similar to the case of the woman who goes overseas. No, goes overseas, that's the main place where we have the penalties. We apply it also to this case if she got married. However, those two cases are similar enough. However, if the Shomeret Yavam only had relations outside of marriage with some other guy, that's not similar to the case of the woman whose husband goes overseas and no one's going to mix it up. And therefore, there was no need for the rabbis to impose the penalties if there was no marriage. And that would be a reason to limit the penalties only to the rival wife who gets married. Okay, hakones et yevimto usricha diashminan behach kamaita mishum dela ikayam misvat yibum aval hacha dikayam misvat yibum ema la. The Mishnah mentioned two very similar cases, both regarding yibum, where someone had to do yibum, but in the end thought they didn't. But then they had to, and they both get all the penalties. And the question is, why do we need both of these cases? So we need both of them, because if we only had the first one, that's where a man is married to two wives. One of them is a relative, another a non-relative, and there the yavam is directly related to one of the yavamot, and therefore there is no need to do yibum or chalitza at all. So if I only had that one, so I would say, in that one, she should get a penalty, because it turns out that that one that was a niece was an ailonit, so she's out of the picture. So the other one, the rival wife, there was no yibum or chalitza done at all, and she went and she married some other guy. So there, it's more reason to give a penalty. But you might have thought that in the second case, where a guy is married to two wives not related, and one of them does yibum, but turns out then to be an ailonit, so yibum was done, and therefore you might think that we should not penalize the rival wife, because she said, okay, someone did yibum. I can't also do yibum. I have no choice, right? And she thought it was totally done. So there's less reason to penalize, because a yibum was done, whereas in the first case nothing was done because it was a relative, and you don't do yibum at all or chalitza at all. So therefore, we need the second case to teach that even in that case you would penalize her. If you only had the second one, well, look, in the second one where there's two rival wives, either one of them was presented before the yavam and could have done yibum with him, including that rival wife. So she had agency. She could have said, "I want to be I'll be the one to do yibum." And but she didn't, and the other one did it instead. So because she was, or it's not totally up to her, the Avam could choose which one he wants, but because potentially she could have been one of the people that did yibum, and now she went and didn't, and married someone else, because the other one did yibum, turns out she was an ailonit, there's more reason to penalize. Whereas in the case where one of them is a relative, there the rival wife was never even presented to possibly do yibum, because there was no yibum at all if someone is a relative. So I might think that there's less reason to penalize, and that's why we have to have both cases. All right, lastly, Katav ha-soferet v'ta'av v'natan get la'isha v'shovar v'chule. If the documents were switched around, Rabbi Eliezer omer im la'altar yasad. The Tanna Kama said that they get all the penalties, whereas Rabbi Eliezer says if they notice the mistake right away, then there's no get at all. Hechi damid la'altar. How soon is right away? Hechi damid la'achar zaman. And how far away is after a long time? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel kol zeman sheyoshvin v'asukin b'oto inyan zeu la'altar amdu zeu la'achar zeman. If they are sitting at the session of the divorce case and they're all still there in the room, then that's immediate, right? Even if they did, here's your get, and here's your receipt for paying, right? And they're still there in the room, and they're just signing some documents and settling some things, but they're all there. Then they read it and notice. They say, "Oh, I got the wrong one." That's no get at all. But if they stood up and left, even if it's just a half hour later, then that's already considered after the time, and we say, "Oh, it's a good get." According to Rabbi Elazar, it's a valid get. Rabbi Amar Lo nised zehu la'altar, nised zehu la'achar zeman. Ravada says that immediately is not immediately. She didn't get remarried. You can always fix it, right? And she comes and says, even if it's 5 years later, she still didn't get remarried. She comes and says, by the way, I never got the get, right? This is actually a receipt. So we say, oh, okay, now you didn't get it. All right, so there's no get here. then that way, go get a new get, or because this get was totally invalid. However, if she went and got remarried, now this is not easy to fix at all. She's already now with the second guy. How are you going to undo the first one? It's going to cause big problems. So if she's already married, then we say, well, how do we believe you? Maybe you went and gave him the get, so he can produce it, so you can give your second husband, you colluded with your first husband. So that would only make sense if they were if she was in fact already married. Then you can't take away the right for the second marriage. But if she's not married, then just easy fix. Tenan lo kol emenu min harishon abed zechuto shel sheni bishlam Rav Ada bar Havahanu dekatani sheni ele l'Shmuel mai sheni. Okay, question to Shemuel. The reasoning that Rabbi Elazar said was, we ruin the right of the second husband. That makes sense according to Rav Ada, who says she's already married. That's why there's a second husband. But according to Shemuel, who says lachar zman means 10 minutes right after later, right? She just left the room, right? 1 minute later after they left the room, so married within that 1 minute. So what do you mean second husband? And the answer is zechut hareuya lesheni. We mean the right that is due to a second husband that would come around, even if she's not married yet. Receiving that get gives a right to someone else to marry her. And now that they come, we switched around, really, look, we were never divorced at all. And so we're still married to the first guy. So then that will ruin the right of a suitor or potential suitor that may come. And so they are not believed once they leave the room to ruin that right for a second potential husband. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.